I flew the Quiet Hand on her 11th test flight, and for 6 weeks, the thing I was chasing had been listed in the survey logs as a rumor, not a coordinate. 3 deep-range probes had gone dark in the same 40,000-kilometer stretch of nothing. No debris, no distress burst, nothing but a clean signal cutoff at the same bearing each time. Command called it instrument failure. The techs who'd built the probes called it something else, quietly after hours. They called it the Ghost Moon, a body massive enough to account for the gravitational hiccups 3 different surveys had logged, and small enough and dark enough that nothing had ever actually seen it. The Quiet Hand was built to see things. She was the first hull off a line nobody outside my wing had clearance to name, a single pilot scout with a sensor suite that could read the heat signature of a struck match from orbit, and a drive quiet enough that I'd once drifted past my own training cadre without them logging me. She wasn't a warship. She didn't carry enough ordnance to insult a system defense grid. What she carried was patience, and me. I found the bearing the 3rd probe had died on, throttled back, and let her drift. I'd requested the assignment myself, which my wing commander thought was either ambition or a death wish, and never decided which. I told him it was neither. I told him a ship built to see things that didn't want to be seen ought to go looking for the one thing in this sector that had managed it 3 times running. He signed off on it the way commanders sign off on things they expect to regret, with a long look and no further questions. I didn't tell him I'd known Asher Condi. I'm not sure it would have changed anything, but I didn't tell him. The space out there was the kind of empty that makes you doubt your own instruments out of sheer boredom. No debris field, no stray ice, nothing for the sensors to chew on for hours at a stretch. I ran 3 full sweeps and got nothing but the same gravitational hiccup the surveys had already logged, a fractional drag at a bearing that should have held nothing heavier than dust. I held position there longer than I should have, watching a needle twitch against a vacuum that wasn't supposed to push back. The pull, when it came, wasn't violent. It was polite. A slow, deliberate hand closing around the Quiet Hand and drawing her down toward a patch of starfield that had no business having mass in it at all. My instruments told me, calmly and with total confidence, that I was being grabbed by something that did not exist. I logged everything I could, burned a tight beam squirt back toward the relay buoy with my last confirmed position, and then I did the only useful thing left to do, which was stop fighting the pull and watch. The moon resolved out of the dark like something surfacing, not appearing, uncloaking, the field around it folding back the way a hand opens. It was small, barely moonlit-sized, pocked and ordinary on the outside, and lit from within along 100 seams, like a lantern somebody had wrapped in rock to hide the light. That was the first contact moment, though I didn't have the word for it yet. I just had a ship that wasn't mine to fly anymore, descending into a hollow world that had been sitting in human shipping lanes for who knew how long, utterly unseen by design. They put the Quiet Hand down on a deck inside the moon built for ships 10 times her size, and they were not ready for what came out of her, because what came out of her was one person, unarmed, hands visible, who climbed down the ladder instead of being carried out of it. The one who met me called herself Orena Vask, broker rank, and she had 4 extra fingers and the unhurried manner of someone who had done this exact thing 1,000 times before with 1,000 different species. Behind her stood a taller figure in dull plating who didn't give a name at all, Director Calyx Rowe. I'd learn later, enforcement rank. Here because every unscheduled arrival got assessed by enforcement before the Conquered decided what to do with it. The Tessar Conquered, Vask told me, plainly, the way you'd explain house rules to a guest who'd wandered in uninvited. They had kept this hub off every chart in this arm of space for longer than my species had been flying. Not through force, through care. They traded with whoever found them, on whatever terms kept the location quiet, and they had learned, Vask said this with something close to pride, exactly how to read a newcomer in the first 10 minutes of contact. They knew about the probes. That was the part that should have frightened me more than it did. 2 had been retrieved intact and quietly cannibalized for data. The third had carried a pilot. They put his last recorded log in front of me on a flat plate of light. His voice, his name, a man named Asher Condi I had trained alongside 2 years before he transferred to Deep Survey. And Vask told me, still pleasant, still unhurried, that they would trade me safe passage home, full and quiet, undocumented, in exchange for 2 things. My ship's full sensor logs of the approach to their hub. And my agreement, on record, that I had never seen this log, never heard his voice, never confirmed to anyone that he hadn't simply been lost to a system failure like Command already believed. It was a small ask dressed as a kindness. Nobody back home would ever know the difference. Condi was already dead. The lie would cost nothing and save my life. I want to say I weighed it carefully, like a hero in a recruiting reel. I didn't. I said no almost before she finished the sentence, and then I sat there in the quiet that followed and meant it anyway, because some things you don't get to decide twice. I told them they could have the sensor logs. I told them I would not erase a dead man from his own death, and that whatever they did with me next, that part wasn't for sale. Vask didn't argue. She didn't threaten me either, which was somehow worse. She simply looked at Director Rowe, and Rowe looked at me for a long moment with eyes built for reading pressure changes in a room, and then they both stepped back through the hatch and left me alone with the quiet hand and a deck full of Cartel ships that had, very quietly, begun powering up their drives. I watched it happen through the scout's own sensors, because nobody had thought to seal her instruments, which told me something too. 6 conquered enforcement hulls, lit and armed, moving into a loose envelope around my position. I had no weapons worth the name and nowhere to run, and I sat in my own cockpit and waited to find out what an unarmed refusal was worth against 6 armed ships, and I will tell you honestly that I expected the worst kind of answer. I ran the math anyway, out of habit more than hope. 6 hulls, full power, against a scout built for quiet, not survival. There was no version of it where I came out ahead. I keyed my last position into the transponder buffer once more, in case the squirt I'd sent before the pull had gotten through, and then I unstrapped, sat back and watched. What I got instead was stillness. The 6 hulls held formation for 11 minutes. I counted every one of them on the chrono, because counting was easier than thinking, close enough that I could read their hull markings, far enough that they never crossed into a firing solution. Then, without a shot, without a final word from Vask or anyone else, they peeled off, one by one, and the lights along the moon's hidden seams began going dark behind them. By the time the field reopened to let the quiet hand out, the hub was already going cold. Not destroyed, abandoned, packed up and pulled out the way you'd strike a camp you no longer trusted to be quiet. I didn't understand it for years, not really. Not until I'd had enough rooms like that one to compare it against. The Conquered hadn't been afraid of my ship. A scout with no weapons worth the name was never the threat. What scared them was the math behind my answer, that a single pilot, alone, unbacked, with every reasonable excuse to lie, had refused a costless lie purely because it was a lie, and had done it without calculating the odds first. A species that built people like that and then sent them out alone, unarmed, into the dark to look for ghost moons, that wasn't a species you wanted to find out more about by force. That was a species you got off the chart from fast and let the silence do the rest. I flew home with Condi's log intact, and Command got their 40,000 kilometers of nothing back, clean and unremarkable, exactly the kind of report that never makes the briefing slides. I think about that hidden moon sometimes, the lights going dark behind those 6 ships, and what it must have looked like from inside the hull. I never saw fire a single shot in anger. We didn't win that room. We never even fought in it. We just told the truth when it cost us something, and an entire trade empire that had survived on careful math for longer than anyone could remember decided we weren't worth the risk of finding out what we'd do if it cost us more.